They gave the city one final chance to surrender. The Caliph laughed and dismissed the messengers immediately. 3 weeks later, he was dead, and his city was ash. The river that ran through Baghdad turned black for 7 days, black from the ink of 2 million burned books. This is the story of how civilization disappeared in 1 week. In the year 1258, Baghdad was unlike any city before it. It was perfectly round, built that way entirely by design, a circle of power sitting at the center of the known world. Inside its walls lived over 1 million people. Scholars, merchants, physicians, and astronomers filled every street. Markets sold goods from China, India, Persia, and Africa. The air smelled of spices, leather, and fresh bread daily. Children studied mathematics in schools built from white stone. Doctors performed surgeries that Europe would not attempt for centuries. Astronomers mapped stars from towers rising above the rooftops. Engineers designed irrigation systems that fed millions of people. At the heart of it all stood the House of Wisdom, the largest library on Earth. 2 million manuscripts collected. Centuries of human knowledge gathered from every corner of the world. Mathematics, medicine, philosophy, astronomy, all preserved in one place. Baghdad was not simply a city, it was an idea. The idea that civilization could reach something close to perfection. For 500 years, the Abbasid Caliphate had ruled from here. Dynasty after dynasty had added to its glory and power. No army had ever breached its walls, no enemy had ever entered. The people of Baghdad believed their city was untouchable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Far to the east, something enormous had been moving for decades. The Mongol Empire had already consumed more land than anyone in history. China had fallen, Persia had fallen, entire cities had been erased. Genghis Khan had built an empire stretching from ocean to ocean. Now his grandson, Hulagu Khan, turned his gaze westward. His orders were simple: take Baghdad, end the caliphate forever. Hulagu began assembling an army unlike anything the region had seen. Some historians estimate 150,000 soldiers, others say more. Cavalry from the steppes, infantry from conquered lands, engineers from China. They brought siege weapons, massive catapults built to destroy walls. The army moved slowly and deliberately, like a tide without end. Word reached Baghdad months before the Mongols ever arrived. Governors on the eastern frontier sent desperate letters to the Caliph. They begged for soldiers, for reinforcements, for any kind of help. The Caliph al-Mustasim read the letters and set them aside. He wrote to neighboring rulers asking for military support instead. None of them responded. No army came to Baghdad's defense. The Caliph believed his walls would protect the city as always. He believed the Mongols would stop, as other enemies had stopped before. He was the most powerful ruler in the Islamic world. He had wealth, prestige, and 5 centuries of unbroken authority. But authority meant nothing to the army approaching from the east. In January of 1258, the Mongol forces appeared on the horizon. Soldiers filled the landscape as far as any eye could see. Flags snapped in the cold winter wind above thousands of tents. The sound of hooves and armor carried across the open plain. Hulagu sent one final message directly to the Caliph himself. The message was simple: surrender now, and your people will live. The Caliph refused. He sent back an answer filled with pride. That answer sealed the fate of the greatest city on earth. The bombardment began the morning after the Caliph's refusal arrived. Massive catapults launched enormous stones through the cold winter air. The ground shook with every impact. Dust rose above the walls. Walls that had stood for centuries began to crack under pressure. Defenders on the battlements returned fire with arrows and burning oil, but they were outnumbered in ways that made resistance nearly impossible. Day after day, the bombardment continued without pause or mercy. Nights offered little rest. Repair crews worked by torchlight constantly. Food inside the city grew scarcer with each passing week. Exhaustion spread among the soldiers defending the damaged outer walls. Citizens prayed in mosques lit by the glow of distant fires. Mothers held children close as the ground trembled beneath their feet. After 2 weeks of siege, a section of the eastern wall collapsed. The breach was wide enough for soldiers to pass through easily. Defenders rushed to fill the gap with timber, stone, and bodies. The Caliph, watching from his palace, finally understood what was coming. He made a desperate decision. He would go out and negotiate. The Caliph rode through the city gates himself, surrounded by advisors. He brought gold, jewels, and written promises of total submission. He bowed before Hulagu Khan and offered everything he had left. Hulagu received him calmly, accepted the gifts, and offered him tea. Then Hulagu gave a quiet order to the soldiers standing nearby. The Caliph was arrested. His advisors were taken away in chains. The Caliph's own officials, fearing death, opened the city gates themselves. Mongol soldiers poured through the gates of Baghdad like floodwater. They moved district by district through the streets of the great city. The Grand Mosque fell silent. The palaces were stripped to bare walls. The markets that had connected the entire world were looted and burned. Then soldiers reached the House of Wisdom and stopped at its doors. Inside were 2 million books, the memory of human civilization itself. The soldiers carried the books outside and threw them into the river. The Tigris River turned black with ink. It stayed black for 7 days.
Eyewitnesses wrote accounts that historians would read for centuries afterward. They described water so dark you could not see the riverbed beneath. Centuries of mathematics, medicine, poetry, and philosophy gone in hours. Knowledge that had taken generations to gather disappeared in a single morning. The destruction of the House of Wisdom was not an accident. It was a message. The old world was finished. A new one had begun. The Caliph was executed shortly after his city fell around him. According to Mongol tradition, royal blood could not touch the earth, so he was wrapped in felt and trampled beneath Mongol horses. The 500-year Abbasid Caliphate ended on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The dynasty that had defined Islamic civilization for half a millennium was gone. When the Mongols finally left, Baghdad was almost unrecognizable as a city. The round walls that had defined its shape for centuries were rubble. The irrigation systems that had fed the region for thousands of years were destroyed. They were never fully rebuilt. The farmland around Baghdad slowly turned to desert. A population that had once numbered over 1 million was reduced to almost nothing. Some historians estimate up to 200,000 people died that week. Others believe the true number was far higher than any record shows. The city that had once been the envy of the entire world fell silent. Historians call 1258 the end of the Islamic Golden Age, and they are right. The civilization that had led the world in science and medicine was broken. Europe, which had been centuries behind in knowledge, would eventually recover and advance. Baghdad never fully returned to what it had been before that January. The trade routes that had passed through it shifted and found other paths. The scholars who survived fled to distant cities and started over from nothing. The river still runs through the city of Baghdad today, as it always has. The water is clear now, clean and ordinary and unremarkable in every way. But for 7 days in 1258, it ran black, and the world never came back.